Okay, here's the third video. This is where we're putting it all together from the information that you saw in the first video with the radical when you have a negative in there, and then factoring these that have to a power of 4. Okay, so these are the notes. Copy it down. Where's my highlighter? Right here. These are the notes for worksheet 2 for this assignment. All right, so again, remember there's two things that are being asked here. Part A, factor it. Part A, factor it. And what? Part B, what? Find all the zeros. Just like you did very similarly in the last assignment. The last assignment was to the power of 3. This one's to the power of 4. All right, so let's go there. All right, looking at number 1, remember you can always pause it, rewind it, watch it as many times as necessary. Okay, so I'm going to have a kind of scratch paper on the side, and that way it just doesn't get too busy here, so maybe you might want to do the same thing. All right, so let's start with factoring this polynomial here, this quartic equation, not quadratic. Okay, so what have I been asking you to do? Okay, so when you have this problem, you're gonna kind of look at it like this. You're gonna look at it as a quadratic. So if it was just x squared minus 7x plus 12, right? And I'm gonna factor it as a quadratic, and that's gonna factor out as 4 and 3, right? X minus 4, x minus 3. Okay, so I know how to write because they're equations in quadratic form. But the only thing that's going to change is the exponent, right? We talked about this in the second video. So if this is the one where the quadratic factors out like this, then how will you factor this one out? Well, with a minus 4 and a minus 3. So that'll be f of x is equal to parentheses x squared minus 4 and x squared minus 3, right? Because remember, x squared times x squared is x4. When it's this one down here, it's x times x is x squared. Okay, so this is part A. You did part A where it says to factor it. That's part A. This is the answer for part A. You wrote it in a factored form. Now, part B, to find all zeros. Part B, to find the zeros, again, just like the previous assignment. To find the zeros, you let this one equal to 0. 0 is equal to x squared minus 4 and x squared minus 3. And here's where that first video is going to come into play. How do you solve each of these? Remember, you set each of these equal to 0. So I got x squared, I'll write it this other way. X squared minus 4 equal to 0, and I mean, you could have wrote the 0 on this side, it's fine. And then this one's going to be what? I'll leave it the way it is. 0 is equal to x squared minus 3. Hope that's not confusing you. And then when you don't have that middle term and you just have an x squared and a number, we can just move the number to the other side. You don't have to factor it. So doing that would give you what? Well, that would give me x squared is equal to positive 4. I'm going to do this one first. You take the square root of both sides. Oh, and this one's going to work nicely. It's not going to have a negative number. Remember, at this point, you're going to get x equals plus minus. You got to put plus minus. And the square root of 4 is what? Well, the square root of 4 is exactly a 2. So here there's 2 answers. Remember, you're going to have to give me what? 4, right? It's to the power of 4. You're going to find 4 zeros. Some will be real and some will be imaginary. Here's 2 of them here. I'm going to get the other 2 from this one. And this one, when I move the negative 3 over, well, it'll be positive 3 is equal to x squared. Oh, you're not going to get any negative on this one. Lucky for you. Right, I move the negative 3 to that side, so I get x squared alone. I square root both sides. You'll get x is equal to what? plus minus. See, nothing's going to tell you. You got to remember to do that. The square root of 3 doesn't, nothing happens to it. You can't simplify it. So here's 2 zeros and here's the other 2 zeros. Remember, you have to find 4. The degree of the polynomial tells you how many you're going to find in total. Some might be real. Like in this case, they're all real. Some might be a couple of real, a couple of imaginary. So again, when you see the answer sheet here for something like this, here's your 4. It's going to list them like this: zeros. It'll have a 2. It'll have a negative 2. It'll have a positive root 3, and it'll have a negative root 3. All right, there's 2 here, positive 2, negative 2, positive root 3, negative root 3. There's your zeros. That's number 1. That one's easy. Okay, let's do the second one. Second one, number 2. Same deal, right? And I'll just do this one over here. I'll look at this as a quadratic, so it'll be what? X squared plus 14x plus 45. If it's a quadratic, how would I factor a quadratic with the plus 14 and the plus 45? That would be x. 45 is 9 times 5? Yeah, plus 9 plus 5. 9 times 5 is 45, and 9 plus 5 is 14. So if this is the way this one factors, for x squared, how will you write this for with the power of 4? Well, you're still going to have the plus 9. You're still going to have the plus 5. That's still going to give you the 14 and the 45. But to get x4 will be what? X squared and x squared. That's the only difference. So here's your part A. Here's its factored form. Yeah? Remember, you're doing 2 things for each of these problems. One, you're factoring it, and then now we're going to do part B. You're going to find all zeros. To find the zeros of a polynomial, you set it equal to what? You set it equal to 0. So set that equal to 0, so that 0 is equal to x squared plus 9 and x squared plus 5. All right. So we did the hardest part, the factoring. Now the part with the square roots. Now we got to set each one of these equal to 0. So let me do one here. I'll do one here. X squared plus 9 equals 0. And then I'll do the other one over here. X squared plus 5 equals 0. All right, let me solve this one. Now watch what's happening here. When I move this plus 9 to that side, see, there it is. You're going to get a negative number. That's when you know you're going to get an imaginary. Why? Because you can't square anything and get a negative out of it. And we continue with this. I square root both sides. Again, don't skip steps. I square root. And remember, this becomes x. And remember to put plus minus. And then you got that negative 9. And remember that negative 9, that's like a 9 times a negative 1. Right? That's like a 9 times a negative 1. But what's the key thing that we learned? That negative 1 is equal to I squared, or sometimes they'll write it the other way. I squared is equal to negative 1. So pretty much that negative 1, you change it to an I squared. So that'll be x is equal to plus or minus square root of 9. And that negative 1 becomes I squared. And now this is going to work. Both of these have a perfect square root. The 9 has a perfect square root, and the I squared is a perfect square. So x is equal to plus or minus what? 3i. Remember, the square root of 9 is 3. The square root of I squared is I. Here's my first 2, and I'm going to get the other 2 from here. Do the same thing. That's going to be x squared is equal to, when I toss it to the other side, that positive 5, see, it's going to become negative 5. There you go. You're going to get imaginary again. That's going to be x squared is equal to negative 5. I'm going to square root both sides. That's going to be x is equal to plus minus the square root of a negative 5. That negative is like a negative 1, but that changes to a what? I squared. Just remember, whenever you have a negative, just change it to I squared inside the parentheses, 5i squared. right, for this reason. Just like I explained there, and I explained in video 2, that negative becomes I squared. Negative 1 becomes I squared. And then here, the 5 doesn't have a square. You can't simplify it under the square root, but the I squared always comes out. So you're going to get x is equal to plus minus I, and then the 5 again stays in. That's your other 2. And then in the when you look in the answer for the zeros, how is it going to list it? How are the zeros going to be listed? Well, it's going to have a positive 3i, right? It's going to have a negative 3i. That's these two right here. Oops, sorry. Positive 3i, negative 3i, and then what? A positive I root 5 and a negative I root 5. All right. Those are the zeros. Remember, it's to the power of 4. You're going to get 4. All right. All right, let's continue and do the last two more examples. I'll go a little quicker here. All right, so we're just going to pretend this is like x squared and 3x and the 10. So we're going to go with f of x is equal to what? I think you guys probably are getting it now. What multiplies to 10? Well, I know it's x4, so it's going to be x2 and x2. Okay, take care of that. And what multiplies to a 10 or a negative 10 and can give you a positive 3, a 5, and a 2? That's a positive 5 and the negative on the 2. Make sure you look at your signs and make sure you're doing it right. Okay, so this takes care of part A, the factoring, right? Takes care of the factoring. And now that's part A. Part B, you set that equal to a 0, and then you solve these ones individually, right? Okay, so let's do this one first. X squared plus 5 equals 0. We just did one like that. And x squared minus 2 equals 0. That's going to be x squared equals negative 5. When you throw it to that side, take the square root of both sides. It's going to be x equals plus minus the square root of a negative 5. That's going to be plus minus the square root of 5i squared. We just did one like this, right? So that's going to be x is equal to plus minus what? Remember, the I squared always comes out, and you always check the number. The number doesn't come out. I root 5. We just did one on number 2 with the 5, just like this. There's 2 of them there. And now look at this one. This one's going to actually be okay, right? Because when I move the negative 2 over, it'll be x squared equals to positive 2. Oh, good. I don't have to worry about the i's. The I squared, right? So that's going to be, take the square root of both sides. That's going to change into a x, and remember, plus minus, nothing's going to tell you to do that. You have to remember at this step to do that. 2 does not have a square root. The square root of 2, that's it. It doesn't simplify anymore, so guess what? It just stays like that. So your zeros, when you see this, I'll put these real ones first. Root 2 and a negative root 2. That's this one, a positive root 2 and a negative root 2. And then a positive I root 5 and a negative I root 5. That's how it's going to look on your answer sheet when you check it. Okay, last one. Doing this real quick. F of x is equal to, I know it's x4. Always check for a GCF. They'll always look if there's a common factor or a number, but these will work out like this. They're going to just be in quadratic form. That'll be plus 8 and plus 3, right? 8 times 3 is 24. 8 plus 3 is 11. And that answers part A, to factor it. Part B, set it equal to 0 to find the zeros. So this one, set it equal to 0. X squared plus 8 equals 0. This one, x squared plus 3 equals 0. Set this parenthesis equal to 0. Set this parenthesis equal to 0. Here you're going to get x squared equals what? Negative 8. Ugh. X squared is equal to negative 8 is going to be, well, first take the square root of both sides. That's going to be x equals plus minus the square root of a negative 8. Don't try to get ahead of yourself and forget the plus minus. That negative 1 is going to be x is equal to plus minus 8i squared, right? Anytime you have just a negative underneath that square root, just change it to I squared, right? And now 8 we can simplify. So that'll be x is equal to plus minus 8 is 4 times 2, and then I got that I squared. Now which one of these have perfect squares? The 4 is a perfect square and the I squared. The 2 doesn't. The 2 is going to stay, it's going to stay inside, it's going to stay home. So the square root of 4 is 2, the square root of I squared is I. And here's your 2 zeros for this one. A positive 2i root 2 and a negative 2i root 2. Okay, let's do this last one over here. The second part, x squared plus 3 equals 0. That's going to be x squared equals what? Negative 3 when you move it to the other side, right? We take the square root of both sides and don't do too many steps at once. I know some of you can see what's happening or what's coming up. But at this point, don't do anything yet. Just put x is equal to plus minus negative 3. Right? That's x. This you got to put the plus minus. Now let's deal with this. That's x is equal to plus minus root 3 I squared. Remember that negative just turns into an I squared. 3 does not, you can't break this down and simplify it. So I squared always comes out, right? So x is equal to plus minus I root 3. All right, so there's your other 2. And that's how we're doing this. All right, hopefully not too much from what you already know. Go back and look at the first video or the second video if you need to, but this is where it's all used and applied. All right, good luck with the assignment.